Chair.
I call the honourable member Grant Robertson.
Mr Chair, I just want to take a brief call, partly to respond to that call we've just heard from Nikki Kay and partly to ask the Minister and the Chair a question. I think, in fairness to the member, everybody in this House throughout the debate has acknowledged the importance of filling the regulatory gap that there is. There's been some disagreement among parties about how we do that, the extent to which we need to have consistency with our international obligations, the extent to which we need to have consistency with our domestic law, such as the RMA, and there's been a shift from the government in that regard, which we welcome on this side of the House. But I think it's important, if we're going to use Part 3 as the example of what Nikki Kay has just said, that she mentioned the importance of the community and the importance of people having confidence in the system. And that's the very reason why we've got an amendment in place around the question of appeals and whether or not appeals can go to the Environment Court. Because that is exactly the point of giving people the opportunity to have a say. Remember, under this law, appeals can only be on points of law. They can't be on facts. They can't be on new information. And if the member is serious about wanting to create a law that gives the community a say, that ensures that there's community confidence, I don't see how opposing the SOP that we have to bring the Environment Court back in would do that. I think it's actually, it would be good for the government to stop and think and listen to for instance, the contribution from Eugenie Sage just now on what role the Environment Court can actually play in helping develop law in this area. Because it's quite clear for anyone who's been following this debate that there will be significant dispute around some of the things that have been raised in this bill. For instance, the meaning of the phrase favour caution or whatever you want to look at. There will be issues here. And the Environment Court has actually played a very constructive role in establishing the body of law and practice with the RMA. And that's the point. That's the point, but specifically in Clause 103 on the question of appeals, that's why we've made that change. I mean, this is a genuine thing. I'm not saying that the government doesn't care about this. I'm just saying that there is a better alternative that we know about as a result of the RMA that would facilitate the thing that the member just told us that she was concerned about, which was the involvement of the community and the ability to build up that body of law that will give people confidence. So, Mr Speaker, Mr Chair, I think I appeal to the government to have a look at the SOP that exists on this and consider whether or not they could support both broadening the scope of appeals to be able to be on matters of fact as well as on matters of law, and also to bring the Environment Court back into that phase, because I do believe that will make for better law in the long run in this area. Mr Chair, the other matter I just wanted to quickly raise was around the question of penalties contained in Section 1, Clause 125. And as I think I said in my earlier contribution on this matter, we welcome the fact that the government has increased the penalty for someone committing an offence under this Act to the large figure of $10 million. That's great, but then there's now an inconsistency created in the law, because the following provisions of Section 125 cover what happens in the event of a continuing offence. So when somebody continues to break the law, and that's defined quite clearly under Clause 125(6), where it says the continued existence of anything or the intermittent repetition of any actions contrary to any provision of this Act is a continuing offence. So there's a very clear definition of what a continuing offence is. The government has rightly said this is such a significant area, we have to set a proper deterrent in place. We have to set up something that is commensurate with the scale of what will be going on in the EZ. $10 million for an offence, that's great. But then we come down to Clause 125, 2, 3 and 4, and we have fines of $10,000 a day for a continuing offence. It's now completely out of whack, Mr Chair. $10 million when you break it, and then we drop all the way down to $10,000 a day. If you're Mr Speaker, if there's a company that's, and these are large companies involved in this, that's hardly a consistent or commensurate penalty for a continuing offence. So I welcome the fact that the government has decided to amend Clause 125 when they've done exactly the right thing. which, as my colleagues have noted in the Select Committee, was something that opposition parties said often, much to the concern of the government members who didn't seem to, at that point, agree with this. They do now. So why then not back SOP number 103 in Moana Maki's name, or indeed the SOP in Gareth Hughes' name, that actually make those penalties for a continuing offence more appropriate? They're out of whack at the moment, Mr Chair.
I call the honourable member Grant Robertson.
They're out of whack at the moment, and I would like the Minister and the Chair or a government member to be able to rise now and tell us why they won't make changes to the continuing offence penalties, given that they've made those changes under 1251. It just doesn't make logical sense, Mr Speaker. The House is in agreement here that we need to have penalties that fit the crime, as it were, and have a deterrent effect. That's happening in one part of Clause 125, but then it completely fails in the rest. In 1252, at the moment, the first stage of what happens with a continuing offence is a fine not exceeding $10,000 for every day. We're proposing in the SOP 103 that become $100,000 every day from there on. After that, when it's a summary conviction and it carries on at $1,000 per day under Section 1253. We would like to see that go up to $100,000, and if the offence is a continuing one, to a further fine not exceeding $10,000. And then finally, under Clause 4, where it says a person who commits an offence is liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $1,500, we would like to see that go to $15,000. This is simply consistent with where the government's now reached on Clause 1251, and if the government isn't going to support that SOP, this House deserves to know why, because it's completely inconsistent and illogical, and we end up with a penalty regime that does not fit the magnitude of what may be taking place inside the EZ. So that's our big concern with Clause Part 3 of this bill. We do want to support the government in raising these penalties. Everybody in this House wants to support the government, but I just urge some consistency in this particular part.
I call the honourable member Reno